Not meeting this Sunday? Okay. Okay, no problem. All right, good. All right, Job chapter 39. A professor of history once said that if Columbus had turned back, no one would have blamed him. But nobody would have remembered him either. The single reason we remember him with such admiration, not everyone does, but is because he endured, right? Because he endured. Someone once said also, don't trust a man who hasn't suffered. And I believe that the most valuable counsel oftentimes comes from someone that is experienced, not from a novice, but someone that has experience, someone who has been in the trenches, someone who's been through some difficult times. Oftentimes their life is a little bit deeper, a little bit richer than someone who has not suffered. Lucius Seneca put it this way. He said, the bravest sight in the world is to see a great man struggling against adversity. We have been studying Job over the last several months now, and I have kept, meditating on Job's response to adversity. For me, it's been like chewing on a bone. That's one of the advantages you have when you study something, right? That you have to teach it, so you have to study it. And you keep thinking about it even through the weeks. As you're working or you're doing other things, you're thinking about the next message, and you keep chewing on what you've taught or what you will be teaching. And that's how it's been for the book of Job for me. It's kind of like a bone. You have a barbecue, and you eat your chicken, and you chew on the bone. And some people really chew it really nice and clean. It's just like they almost take off some of the bone marrow. But that's kind of how the book of Job has been to me, especially the first couple of chapters. I've been meditating and chewing on it, and then specifically looking at Job and how he responded to adversity. See, the thing about Job is that when we read Job, we see the other side of the curtain, and we kind of looked at some of this before, and I'm just going to go briefly over some of it, maybe throw in some new ideas or new thoughts to this, maybe a little bit of more meat as we keep chewing on this bone. But if we look at Job, he had no idea that God and Satan were having a conversation, and that he was the subject of their conversation. He didn't know. See, when you see someone, maybe say a fist comes towards you and you know it, you brace yourself for it, right? Or you have some other object hitting you, you brace yourself, you defend yourself. But if you don't know, you don't see it coming, it hits you just point blank. And that's how it was for Job. Now, we know that Job, it says that he would offer up sacrifices each time that his children would have a party. He would just, it seems that Job was a good father. He had a good relationship with his kids. It's not that they were partying and having a wild party. They were having fun. They were maybe having some good laughs about what happened and what was going on and so forth. And they're just having a great time. And Job, who was so concerned, he was so godly, he would always offer up a sacrifice just in case any of his children had maybe said something or thought something in their heart. So he was a great man. And his children are having a party again. So probably Job is maybe in the process of preparing a sacrifice for the following day. Maybe he is gathering some wood and bringing in the best sheep. And it's a beautiful day. And then maybe his wife is inside. Maybe she's, preparing dinner for supper. Supper or something, preparing food for supper. And then the news starts coming in. The first one comes up, with this horrible news of what just happened there at his ranch. And then the second one, and the third one. He's got 4 waves of bad news coming his direction. And after he received the last news, which was the most horrible news, that his 10 children had died, he says there in Job chapter 1 and verse 20, it says, then Job arose, he tore his robe, and he shaved his head, and he fell on the ground and he worshiped. So that's what he did. And then secondly, the next verse tells us what he said. So the first verse tells us what he did, and the other one says tells us what he said. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Now, I don't know how much time is between, and I've been thinking about that, how much time maybe it could have elapsed between verse 20 and verse 21, from the time that he responded to the news till the time that he actually said what he said. It could have been some time in between. It could be that he first ran to his place where his kids were lying under the rubble, and maybe he attended first a head funeral. The 10 fresh graves were there, and Job looks at them. His family is gone. So maybe that happened between verse 20 and 21. We don't know. But Job's initial reaction is after he had the fourth wave come towards him, it seems that he was sitting down as he received the news. Maybe he was sitting there, prepared to wood. He would always offer up sacrifices. We don't know what he was up to, but the first thing it says that he arose. So he was sitting while he received the news. And then secondly, it says here that he tore his robe. Note all the action things that he was doing, the action verbs. He gets up, he tears his robe, and that is, they would wear an outer garment. In those days, you'd have your inner garment and the outer garment. And it was customary in those days that if you were in great shock or anguish, you would just grab your outer garment and you would just tear it. So he did that. He expressed great shock and anguish, which was normal. And then he did a third thing, and that is he shaved his hair. He shaved his hair. In the scriptures, hair is always a sign of glory. It's an expression of worth. But he shaves his head, which is symbolic of great loss. And then he falls on the ground. And again, and this is what I'm, been thinking about and chewing about, is that he fell on the ground because he's torn his clothes, he's expressed how he's feeling, he's shaved his head, expressing that he's lost his glory, so to speak. And then he falls on the ground. And I think the normal tendency would be to wail or to grieve. But in his case, there's none of that. There's no blame, or you blame God for the problem. All these years I've served you, and this is what I get for that. He doesn't blame. There's no clenched fist. There's no bitterness. But rather, it says here that he is lying down. Now, the word he fell down, if you look in the Hebrew, it means to fall prostrate. Completely, lying underground, stretched out with the face underground. That's how Job is lying underground, which is a symbol, or really a posture of complete surrender and submission. And I thought about that. Complete surrender and submission. So all this has befallen him. No clenched fists, no bitterness, no anger, no pointing fingers, but prostrate before God with his face on the ground in complete submission, and he's worshiping. Now, if you can imagine what's going on behind the scenes, I can imagine everything is quiet in heaven. You could hear a pin drop in heaven. I mean, the angels are not saying anything. God is sitting. Jesus, the Trinity, they're all watching what's going to happen. Is he going to say something? Because Satan already said that he was going to curse God. And so Satan, he's lurking in the shadows. with all the demons. They're sitting there and they're watching at the edge of their seat. What is he going to say? And then Job speaks. His first recorded words. He says, Job 1 verse 21, it says, and he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. See, we are born with a small, little, tiny, naked body. I've never seen anyone born with clothes. My kids had no clothes on when they were born, all right? They were naked and and when they were born. And really that's how we depart. We depart really just as we came, except that we have a whole lot more wrinkles and probably don't look as nice, but we're, at least if we get old. But the point is he's making is that we don't bring anything into the world, and we don't go out with anything. Everything is the Lord's. It's God's. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. So it's God who gives. So whose is it? It is God's. It is not mine. Now, I might think that some of the stuff that I own is mine, but it's none. Everything is God's. And whatever I have, it's because borrowed it to me. And maybe I think that my wife is mine, or my kids are mine. They're not mine either. God gave them. God gave me the wife I have, and God gave me the children I have. They are also God's. They're not mine. So everything, not just the material, but even my own family is not mine. And I was thinking about that. Job really understood that. The Lord gave him all the material wealth, gave him his wife, gave him all his kids, and the Lord took away. He has a right to do that. You don't have to blame him for doing that, because he has the right to do that. It's a loan from God. God doesn't owe us anything. And I think when we live life with that type of attitude, we will find it so much easier to worship in the midst of adversity. Because we realize that everything is just a loan. Everything is the Lord's anyway. And I think that the reason Job endured, and the last verse here tells us that Job did not sin, the reason is because of the way that Job responded in adversity. He responded in worship. He responded in worship. That was his response to his difficulty and to his adversity. Now, I think it's normal for us as humans to walk around worried and wringing our hands when we go through adversity. But for Job, he realized it's in God's hands. And he lay prostrate and he worshiped. Now, we know that Job feels that God has gone silent and God is not coming through. But finally, in chapter 38, God shows up and he begins to speak to him. And Job has expressed how he would like to have a hearing with God. He would like to go to court with God. God on one side, he on the other, and they would have a conversation. Job feels he has some questions to ask. Well, God comes through, but rather than having Job ask him some questions, God begins to ask Job some questions. Basically, we could say he gave Job a tour of the universe. First of all, he talks about the foundations of the world and the seas and the wind. And then he takes Job to outer space and asks Job if he can command all these galaxies up there. And then God begins to talk about nature again. He talks about animals and who controls these animals, who handles them, who's made them the way they are and the way they're designed. In chapter 39, verse 1, it says, "Do you know the time when the wild mountain goats bear young? Or can you mark when the deer gives birth? Can you number the month that they fulfill? Or do you know when the time when they bear young? They bow down, they bring forth their young, they deliver their offspring. Their young ones are healthy, they grow strong with grain, they depart, and they do not return to them. Who set the wild donkey free? Who loosed the bonds of the onager? Whose home I have made in the wilderness, and the barren land his dwelling. He scorns the tumult of the city. He does not heed the shouts of the driver, the range of the mountains in his pasture, and he searches after every green thing. So he's got some questions to ask Job about the mountain goat, the deer. Here it says here, the onager or the wild donkey. The deer or the wild donkey, do you control them when they have their young? Who has programmed these young ones that they know what to do or how to survive on their own? Who's programmed that? Who's given them that instinct? Have you done that, Job? Verse 9, he continues, he says, will the wild ox be willing to serve you? Will he bed by your manger? Can you bind the wild ox in the furrow with ropes? Or will he plow the valleys behind you? Will you trust him because his strength is great? Or will you leave your labor to him? Will you trust him to bring home your grain and gather it to your threshing floor? Now, this wild ox is really a poor translation. It is a reference to if I pronounce it right, the aurochs, which is now an animal that is extinct. Went extinct somewhere in the 1600s. But it's basically a huge species of cattle. I guess we could say maybe closely equivalent to a rhino today. They're huge. And so, Job, would you be able to tame, I guess, the aurochs, or we could say, we know the rhino today, so could you tame the rhino and plow the field with the rhino? Could you depend on him bringing in the crops? Could you do that? Well, that'd be hilarious. Or could you tie him up? God continues to ask questions. Verse 13. The wings of the ostrich wave proudly, but are her wings and pinions like the kindly stork's? For she leaves her eggs on the ground and warms them in the dust. She forgets that a foot may crush them, or that a wild beast may break them. She treats her young harshly, as though they were not hers. Her labor is in vain without concern, because God deprived her of wisdom, did not endow her with understanding. When she lifts herself on high, she scorns the horse and the rider. So Job, another question. Can you explain why the ostrich has wings, but it can't fly like the stork? Or why does the ostrich lay its eggs in a vulnerable place? Or why does the ostrich treat its young harshly? Now, an ostrich, I was reading up on that, it says that an ostrich will drive her young ones away from her when mating season comes. So sometimes they can still be pretty young during the time of mating season, and she will force them away. Now, I think that God is not, harsh with Job, or, I think he's speaking gently, maybe with a smile. I think for Job, it's after all this misery of his friends and the difficulty of his pain and his sores and his fever and all this that he has, it must have been a good distraction to talk with God. Verse 19, have you given the horse strength? Have you clothed his neck with thunder? Can you frighten him like a locust? His majestic snorting strikes terror. He paws in the valley and rejoices in his strength. He gallops into the clash of arms. He mocks at fear and is not frightened, nor does he turn back from the sword. The quiver rattles against him, the glittering spear and javelin. He devours the distance with fierceness and rage, nor does he come to a halt because the trumpet has sounded. At the blast of the trumpet, he says, "Aha!" He smells the battle from afar and the thunder of captains and shouting. So we're talking here about the horse. Job, could you make such an animal? Could you control him? Or who's given the horse a warrior nature? Who's given that? If you think about just a couple verses back where he talks about the ostrich, that he's deprived her of wisdom. Even that, God decided how much wisdom he was going to implant on each animal, how much instinct for them to survive. Think about it. Birds fly across from mainland to Hawaii, and how do they navigate? How can they get across and not get lost? Who did that? Why did he make some animals dumber than others? The horse, he made the horse a little more driven, a little bit more intelligent. He gave the horse enough sense for it to be useful in battle and to disregard its own safety, and to be useful to go out into battle for man. Who did that, Job? Verse 26, does the hawk fly by your wisdom and spread its wings toward the south? Just think about one bird. Think about creating a hawk. Could you figure that out? How to create a hawk? Think about all the intestines and the bones and the wings, the feathers, what it was going to eat, how much acid it's supposed to have in its stomach to digest food. Who did all that? I mean, that's just one bird. And then the reproduction system, the male and the female, that they were going to have youngs, and who was going to put that in their brain, that how they were going to build their nest, and what time, that they didn't build their nest way ahead of time before it was time. Like, how did they know that? Who did that, Job? Verse 27, does the hawk fly by your wisdom and spread its wings toward the south? Does the eagle mount up at your command and make its nest on high? On the rock it dwells and resides, on the crag of the rock and the stronghold. From there it spies out the prey. Its eyes observe from afar. Its young ones suck up blood. And where the slain are, there it is. Now, if you think about that, why does God think about Job? He's lost his kids. He's lost, really, his friends. His wife is turned up against him. He's sick. He is in pain. He has fever. He's got all these sores. He's scraping himself. He's bald. He's shaved himself in anguish. What do you say to a person like that? I mean, couldn't God have spoken something different? I mean, come and talk to him about nature. Is that the thing that you do when someone is grieving? Well, I think it's, if you think about it, God gives Job a tour, if you would, of creation. It kind of reminds me of God walking with Adam and Eve in the garden. It's like God likes to hang out with man and show him around. And he did that with Job. It's like he gave him a tour. First, he showed him, maybe from a distance, he looked at the earth, look how it's created. Look at the shore and the water. It used to be all mixed up, and I separated it and I make it beautiful. Look at the trees and nature. And then he took Job up into the galaxies, and he showed him all the planets and the belt of the Orion and all these different planets. And then God brought him down, and he began to show him the nature. He showed him everything. It's like, did you see that, Job? See that over there, Job? Seen that before? And he shows him around, and Job begins to see how great God is. That God created everything, and how vast and how big. and how powerful and how amazing God is. And he sees the creation, that there is a creator behind all this. It's like God is saying, Job, take your eyes off the ass sheep and begin to look at me. Don't look at your pain, but rather look at my greatness. I think it's something that we can learn in our trials is don't focus on your trials. Focus on God and focus on the greatness of who God is. Chapter 40, we'll read the first 5 verses. It says, Moreover, the Lord answered Job, and he said, Shall the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? He who rebukes God, let him answer it. Then Job answered the Lord, and he said, Behold, I am vile. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand over my mouth. Once I have spoken, but I will not answer. Yes, twice, but I will proceed no further. See, what has happened to Job is that he has been humbled by looking at the greatness of God. See, at first he wanted to question God. And all of a sudden, he has no desire to question God. Not after he's seen. After God has given him a tour of what he has made, he has no desire to question God any longer. His first response is one of humility. He says, I am vile. In Hebrew, it's a word that's very difficult to translate really into English. It's really, the word vile is a poor translation. The word here is the word really just simply the word lightweight. That's really what it is. It means lightweight. I am lightweight. That's basically what he says. Or it could also be translated unworthy. So after all the questions that God had asked him in regard to God's creation, Job says, I am a lightweight. God, you are heavyweight, worthy. I am lightweight, unworthy. See, maybe in our lives, we might at times feel that we know something. You know, we're someone. We're not that small, but like Job, when he saw God and he saw God for who he was reminded of how unworthy and how small he really was, and he was humbled. And he had no desire to ask any questions. He just began to realize there was nothing to ask. God was so much greater. So his first response is that I am vile, a response of humility. And then the second response is, he says, what shall I answer you? What shall I answer you? I think Job began to realize that there was nothing to answer. There were no answers to give to God. Because God already understands the whole universe. He understands everything. He has all the answers. There's no answer to give to him. See, in a sense, it's a relief, isn't it? When you begin to realize that you don't have to tell God anything. He already knows everything. There's nothing to tell him. And so you can basically just rest in his wisdom. And I think God does that maybe in our lives sometimes. He can bring us to the end of ourselves, to a place of total surrender and brokenness, like Job, lying flat on the ground with the face to the ground. A place of brokenness. And I think it's a place where when we get to that place, it helps us to acknowledge that the Lord is God. And that his plans and his reasons are deeper and higher and broader than we will ever comprehend. God knows so much more than we do. You know, how ridiculous really to point or a little puny little finger at God and ask questions. There's really nothing to ask once you begin to understand how great God is. And so he says, What shall I answer? I lay my hand over my mouth. That's his third response. I lay my hand over my mouth. I dare not say anymore. I've said enough. We see here that Job, up to this point, he was arguing back and forth with his three friends. And actually saying he would like to ask God some questions. But now that he's seen and truly seen God, he doesn't want to say any more. In fact, he's said too much. He just wants to shut up, and he wants to listen to God and see what he has to say. He says here, yes, twice. He says, once I have spoken, but I will not answer. Yes, twice, but I will proceed no further. I've said enough. I've said too much. God, you are the one who is ultimately in charge. See, this God who just asked all these questions in Job chapter 38 and 39 about nature, he is the one who controls nature. He's the one who controls the galaxies, and he's the one that commands the nature, and he commands your life and my life. Ultimately, God is in control, and we are not in control. God is in control ultimately. And I think that's what Job began to understand, that God is in control. You are not in control. And I think when we come to that realization, it's a relief. We can give up the stress. Does it mean that we lay our hands in our, lap and we don't do anything, we're passive? No, I'm not talking about that, but we can give up that stress where we want to control the outcome and just give it to God. And we're going to realize that God is really in control. He's created us all. He created a universe, and he knows the end. Father, we thank you for your word tonight. And Father, we want to learn from Job. Learn some principles from Job. And Father, it makes us feel small when we think that we can serve a God like that, the one who has created all things, and that he is in control of all things. And help us, Lord, to be people that are able to just give things over to you and begin to realize that it is you. You own everything. Even the breath that we breathe, even the air that we breathe. It's your air. You gave it to us. You don't have to take it away. You just have to stop giving it to us. And we fade away. Our heart that keeps beating. The brain that keeps sending signals. It's because you created that, and because you still allow it to be that we're alive. So we owe ourselves to you. We just pray, Lord, help us to learn from Job. That really the true response to adversity is to worship. Thank you, in Jesus' name. Amen.